Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, I'm very pleased to welcome you all to join today's event. Practitioner Talk, Building a Green Future. Last November, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority and the International Finance Corporation jointly launched the alliance to help banks develop the solutions necessary to encourage commercial banks in Asia to adopt strategies and targets to become greener. Following the CEO talk last week, experts and leaders in green building, green finance and policy making will continue to share first-hand experience and intelligence on green building development, financing and investment in today's roundtable session. This is an opportunity to develop your green banking knowledge and participate in this peer-to-peer learning platform. Today, we're delighted to have Mr. Vivek Pathak, Director and Global Head for Climate Business, International Finance Corporation, to deliver opening remarks, followed by a keynote speech by Mr. KS Wong, Secretary for the Environment, Hong Kong SAR Government. After that, there will be a roundtable discussion moderated by Mr. Darryl Chan, Executive Director of the HKMA. Participants are welcome to pose questions for the floor Q&A session. To kick off the roundtable session, may I invite Vivek to deliver the opening remarks. Vivek, please.
Good morning. My name is Vivek Pathak, and I'm IFC's Director and Global Head for Climate Business. IFC is a part of the World Bank Group, and we're the largest global development institution focused on the private sector in emerging markets. I'm delighted to attend this roundtable discussion on green buildings held by the Alliance for Green Commercial Banks. Globally, the building sector consumes more than half of all electricity for heating, cooling, and lighting, and accounts for almost 28% of energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. Cities account for an overwhelming majority of buildings in construction. Cities are expected to grow enormously with economic growth in the coming decade. The urban population has grown from almost 2.3 billion in 1990 to almost 4 billion today. Half of the world's population today lives in cities. IFC's recent report into post-COVID climate-smart investment opportunities indicates that green buildings represent one of the biggest investment opportunities in the next decade, almost 25 trillion across emerging market cities over the next 12 to 13 years. Over half of the green building investment opportunities in emerging markets are expected to be in Asia, totaling almost 18 trillion over the same period. How to seize these huge opportunities? There will need to be a joint effort from policymakers, developers, and financiers. Governments can certainly shape the green buildings market. They can set rules, create incentives through policies, regulations, and monitoring compliance. In return, green buildings can help strengthen a country's energy and water security and help them achieve their climate goals. For example, the Green Contractor Reward Scheme in Hong Kong was developed to encourage and give recognition to the private sector to practice sustainable design and construction. The green buildings market can also be shaped by progressive developers and owners who can demonstrate proof of concept and pave the way for others to follow. In 2018, Capital House in Vietnam tripled its sales and won the Financial Times Award for green buildings. Overall, constructing green costs only marginally more than traditional building methods. Through a program called MAGIC, which is the market accelerator for green construction, IFC supports financial institutions to boost the uptake of green practices and technologies. We're also working to address the issue of embodied carbon through edge building certification, which my colleague Prashant Kapoor will talk about later. Investors and financiers hold tremendous influence to accelerate the market for green buildings. Commercial banks are very clearly a key source of financing. For example, the Dutch bank ABN AMRO has made €1 billion in financing available to support commercial real estate clients' transitions to sustainable buildings. Besides the investment opportunities, green buildings can also help investors and owners manage the risks associated with the transition to a lower carbon economy. Studies and evidence across several markets suggest that buildings green could save between 0.5% to 12% in additional costs. Green buildings are more efficient than traditional buildings and can lower operating costs, increase revenues, reduce exposure to the physical and transition risks presented by climate change. This market represents a growth opportunity which is clearly too big to miss. The UNEP suggests the building sector has the potential to make energy savings of at least 50% by 2050. The future of building construction is very clearly green. It must be if we are to achieve our global climate goals. Today's discussion offers to promise practical insights into financing green buildings. Thank you very much, and I hope you have an enjoyable roundtable.
Thank you, Vivek. Now may I invite Mr. KS Wong to deliver his keynote speech. Mr. KS Wong, please.
I'm glad to see the event Building a Green Future, organized by HKMA and IFC. In your first roundtable about green finance held in April 2021, I note the following viewpoint. There's no green future without green finance. Today, I would like to echo that there's no green future without green buildings. Our green future is closely related to the challenge of climate change. Last year, the 2020 policy address announced that Hong Kong would strive to achieve carbon neutrality before 2050. Carbon neutrality is a very challenging target, but decarbonization is a target that we are determined to achieve. In view of the decarbonization target and timeline as set, we need to work closely together and share the progress, data, and knowledge, etc., in a more transparent manner. Target, timeline, transparency together are the 4 keywords. We call them 4 Ts. Firstly, you may ask, what is our progress so far? We need data transparency. To respond positively to the Paris Agreement, the Hong Kong SAR government published the Hong Kong Climate Action Plan 2030 Plus in 2016, which set out our target to reduce Hong Kong's carbon intensity by 65 to 70% by 2030, compared with the 2005 level. There have been certain notable progress. For example, Hong Kong's carbon emissions reached its peak in 2014, and the carbon intensity in 2018 was about 36% lower than that in the base year of 2005. In terms of per capita greenhouse gas emissions, each Hong Konger incurred 6.2 tons in 2014. That's our peak. In 2018, the per capita emissions have been reduced to some 5 tons. According to our current decarbonization pathway, it will be further reduced to 4.5 tons per capita by 2020 and some 3 tons per capita by 2030. The achievements are made possible by the implementation of various decarbonization measures set out in the Climate Action Plan, including our investment in low-carbon technologies, infrastructure, and buildings. Over the past decade, the government has allocated over Hong Kong dollar 47 billion to implement various green building, energy saving, and renewable energy measures, promote electric vehicles and vessels, and introduce innovative waste-to-energy and waste-to-resources facilities to help reduce waste and to reduce carbon emissions. In addition, the investment of the 2 local power companies in major decarbonization projects amounts to some Hong Kong dollar 39 billion in the last and current development plans spanning 10 years. To add, we attach great importance in enhancing energy efficiency and conservation in the built environment. The government promulgated the Energy Saving Plan for Hong Kong's built environment 2015 to 2025 plus in 2015, setting a target of reducing Hong Kong's energy intensity by 40% by 2025. As per the latest figures, Hong Kong has witnessed a declining trend for energy intensity from 2005 to 2018, with an aggregate drop of over 30%. In fact, Hong Kong has the lowest energy intensity among the APEC economies, i.e. among the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation economies. Secondly, let us look at Hong Kong's local carbon emissions and plan our climate actions towards our decarbonization target and timeline as set. Hong Kong's local greenhouse gas emissions mainly come from three major emission sources. Electricity generation amounted to about 66% of total emissions in 2018, and buildings account for about 90% of the city's electricity usage. Other major emission sources were the transport sector, close to 20%, and waste management, less than 10%. Later this year, we'll update Hong Kong's climate action plan to set out more proactive strategies and measures to reduce carbon emissions. In light of the local emission sources as highlighted, we should invest more in greener and carbon-free energy, low-carbon planning and building development, green transport, development of waste-to-energy and waste-to-resources facilities, as well as adoption of new and innovative technologies. All these will form critical parts of our strategy for building a more sustainable and circular economy. Thirdly, we need to work together more closely. On 5th June, the World Environment Day, I cited a total of 60 letters regarding the 4T Partnership 2.0. As said, 4Ts refers to target, timeline, transparency, togetherness. In 2016, we started the first round of 4T partnership with local major stakeholders, including the largest developers and corporations, with a view to accelerating the progress of green building and energy saving in Hong Kong. Our 4T partners have pledged to reduce energy consumption collectively by 5% by 2020, matching that of the government at the time. Good progress has been made. Based on the data collected so far, the cumulative electricity saving of major 4T partners from 2015 to 2018 was about 180 million kilowatt hour. In this way, we can present the collective targets and timeline of the decarbonization plan of our 4T partners so as to tell the world in a transparent manner how the public and private sectors take up the global challenge together. This year, we are going to convene the second round of 4T partnership with environmental, social, and governance, ESG now being an integral part of the vision and values of corporations and organizations across the world. We hope our 4T partners will contribute with more ambitious targets and robust actions in 4 major areas: green finance, economy, example, green bond, low carbon energy and green building, green mobility, and waste management. For instance, in the context of green energy and building, we share what are the latest government targets and timeline, and invite our 4T partners to consider and update their respective decarbonization plan accordingly. Let me highlight 3 aspects. Green energy target. There are about 50,000 buildings in Hong Kong, of which about 8,000 are owned and managed by the government. We just set the new green energy target, i.e. to further improve government's energy performance by 6% in the next 5 years ending 2024 to 25. We strive to meet this target through 3 principal measures, namely energy and carbon audits, which will be followed by energy-saving projects. Second, virtual commissioning of existing buildings. And then, the wider use of renewable energy and innovative technologies. Regarding virtual commissioning, for example, we plan to implement these smart measures in about 280 major existing government buildings, equivalent to about 80% of government buildings' total energy consumption. Wider adoption of renewable energy. We have set aside a total of HKD 3 billion to install small-scale renewable energy projects in government premises and generate about 30 million kilowatt hour of electricity annually by 2030. As a related issue, the government and the two power companies have also introduced the feed-in tariff (FIT) scheme since 2018 as an effective financial incentive for promoting the community to invest in distributed renewable energy. The responses have been overwhelming. More than 14,000 FIT applications have been received so far, and about 90% of them have been approved. We expect more new and existing buildings in the private sector will integrate renewable energy systems like solar photovoltaic panels and enjoy the FIT incentive. Green building certification. All new major government buildings have to achieve BEAM Plus Gold or above, i.e. the highest or the second highest level of green building certification in Hong Kong. Last but not least, let me briefly touch on decarbonization in the areas of green transportation and waste management. Earlier this year, we announced that Hong Kong's roadmap on popularization of electric vehicles, which will guide Hong Kong's future direction to attain zero vehicular emissions before 2050. We also announced the waste blueprint for Hong Kong 2035, which set out the vision of waste reduction, circular economy, and also zero landfill. We need your support to these areas as well. To conclude, the Paris Agreement requires signatory parties to follow a defined cycle of reporting on existing efforts and to update new efforts. In order to operationalize the Paris Agreement, we have developed the 4T framework, which everyone can use as an operational model. In summary, there should be a carbon-related reduction target and timeline. The efforts can be shown with appropriate metrics so that there is transparency and everyone's effort matters. So we must work together. I understand many international banks and financial institutes have already set decarbonization goals, and some have even pledged to achieve net zero within certain time frame. I encourage relevant stakeholders to set their 4T plans and support our 4T Partnership 2.0. There's no green future without green finance, and there's no green future without green buildings. Let us, including the finance and building sectors, work together towards carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek, for sharing with us the significance and opportunities relating to the development of green building. We should also thank you for the strong support throughout the establishment of this alliance. Let me also thank Secretary Wong for sharing the Hong Kong's decarbonization journey, and more specifically, how to apply the 4Ts framework to the local green building agenda. Hong Kong is one of the most densely populated cities, so there's indeed a lot of commonality with other cities in terms of what we can do to tackle emissions through promoting green buildings for both existing and new buildings. As early as 2009, the United Nations Environment Programme has identified that the building sector has the largest potential for significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions compared to other major emission sectors. In 2020, buildings and construction accounted for 38% of energy related to CO2 emissions globally. To achieve a net zero carbon building stock by 2050, the International Energy Agency estimates that between 2020 and 2030, total building sector emissions would need to fall by around 6% per year. This will be contributed by both cutting the direct building CO2 emissions and indirectly power generation emission by the building sector. The banking sector's contribution towards green building will be crucial to achieving global climate goals. It is important for the financial sector to work with different stakeholders along the building and construction supply chain to address imminent climate change challenges. In this roundtable discussion, experts in sustainability, green buildings, as well as policy making will share their insights in the green building development, financing, and investment opportunities. Now, please join me to welcome our panelists for today. They are Mr. Cheung Hau-wai, Chairman of the Hong Kong Green Building Council. The GBC is a non-profit organization which promotes the standard and development of sustainable buildings in Hong Kong. It is also the certification body for Hong Kong's green building certification system called BEAM+. Our second panelist is Mr. George Hong Choi. George is the Chief Executive Officer of the Link Asset Management Limited. Link is the first real estate investment trust listed in Hong Kong, which has now grown into a leading retail-focused REIT in the world. Link invests and manages a portfolio worth $25 billion, comprising retail facilities, car parks, and offices. Our third panelist is Mr. Prashant Kapoor, Chief Industry Specialist from the Climate Business Group of International Finance Corporation. Prashant leads the IFC's global investments in the built environment, with a particular focus on financing low-carbon development, sustainable cities, and green financial products. He is the entrepreneur who created EDGE, or also known as Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiency, which is a universal standard software application and certification system to mainstream resource-efficient building growth in emerging markets. Today's discussion will comprise of 3 sessions. We have 2 rounds of discussion among our panelists, and then followed by a Q&A session. Now let's start with the first round of discussion. Green buildings are designed, built, renovated, operated, and reused in an ecological and resource-efficient manner. It is obvious that green buildings play a crucial role in achieving climate goals in Hong Kong and globally. So my first question is for Mr. Cheung Hau-wai of Green Building Council. Now, Hau-wai, what is your observation about Hong Kong's green building development, and how can the building sector contribute to the carbon neutrality target?
Thank you for the question. The development of green building in Hong Kong has certainly picked up pace in the last 12 years. In the last 12 years, we have 2,300 buildings certified as green buildings under the BEAM+ rating system developed by the Hong Kong Green Building Council. The rating system is a life cycle measurement of green performance of buildings in Hong Kong. It's designed for Hong Kong and developed in Hong Kong. Our stakeholders include developers, builders, users of buildings, and certainly financiers of buildings. We also include the public, general public, users of building in our publicity education drive in order to drive up the demand for green buildings in Hong Kong. Our overall objective is to ensure sustainability development of the built environment in Hong Kong, to ensure health and well-being of occupants of buildings and users of buildings, and of course, how we should be able to better finance the development of green buildings. Now, we have certain challenges that we need to face in Hong Kong in the development of green buildings. These challenges include achieving carbon neutral target as set out by the policy address last year to be able to achieve carbon neutral by 2050. So that is one of the challenges. The other challenges is our huge stock of existing buildings, how we should be able to re-energize these existing buildings so that they can perform green performance better. And then there is, of course, the cost issue in energizing these buildings, in improving their green performance. There are a few opportunities that we can identify in dealing with challenges. Firstly, there has been tremendous improvement in technology and in innovation. We have smart technology for improving the design and operation of green buildings. We can mobilize microclimate design theory in improving energy performance. We have dashboard facilities available to monitor the performance of green buildings. And we can look beyond actually buildings to look at the whole built environment by looking at the infrastructure as well as the whole built environment as a whole in better utilizing our natural resources like light, air, and even waste. For existing buildings, we now have the technology to retro-commission and retrofit our existing buildings. Our estimate is through retro-commissioning alone, there is the opportunity of improving its energy performance by 5 to 10%, in some cases even 15%. And there is, of course, the need to drive awareness amongst the general public so that we can increase the demand for green buildings and green finance. To deal with the costs in improving energy performance of buildings, we should drive for the idea that investment is really for the health and well-being of occupants of buildings, as well as to drive up goodwill in the investment of green buildings, and also it would be able to increase rental value and building value. And of course, we can entice more green finance in addressing the cost issue.
Thank you, Hau-wai. So my next question is for Mr. Prashant Kapoor of IFC. Prashant, IFC has done a great deal in promoting green building in Asia and other parts of the world. So in your view, what are the challenges and opportunities of developing green buildings in the rest of Asia? And how can the financial industry capture the financing and investment opportunities in green building?
Yeah, so unlike any other sector, building industry is a lot more complex. If you think about the transport sector, the people that are building, say, efficient cars are able to communicate the efficiency to the whole car buyers, and they're able to appreciate and choose based on that. If you look at the building industry, there are no green cars, there are not easy to find green homes, right? That's the challenge for them. So, and what tends to happen is that you get this circle of blame, where between the homeowners, the builders, and the financial industry, the investors, right? If you ask the homeowners, ask yourself, do you want to live in an energy efficient house and save some money? They would say yes, right? Which homeowner does not want to save money and live in an efficient place? But they can't seem to find any homes. Not easy to find when you're looking for houses, what is green, right? If you ask the developers say, hey, we are happy to build green homes, right? But the investors don't seem to need it. And we just build whatever investors are telling us to do, right? If you ask the investors, they say there's no demand. We don't see any demand. How do you know there's any demand? So this circle of blame is a big challenge in the industry. The second challenge really is the perception of cost, right? There is a cost of going green, but the developers think it's something like 30% more expensive, when in reality, our studies show that it's like more like 2% or 1% more than construction cost for green, right? So, but even that 1 or 2%, the developers are expected to cover the cost when they can't recover that money. So that's a big challenge. And then when it comes to homeowners, they would rather buy a little extra square meter rather than actually pay for the energy efficient services. So they have other priorities in effect. And if you look at the financial industry, for them, they would, although they may be interested in doing green construction, they're worried about the risk in that segment, right? They don't understand it so well, and why should they give a little bit more money when actually it increases the NPLs? So this is really the big challenge. But if you step back and look at the whole industry as such, IFC's research has shown that just in East Asia, it's a $16 trillion opportunity. And if financial institutions can tap this opportunity with the right products, such as green bonds, green mortgages, green construction finance, they can really start to show leadership and transform this industry very easily.
Thank you, Prashant. My third question is to George. George, the Link has actually been a pioneer in the local green building area. So why has Link taken green and sustainability in your consideration of your corporate development strategy? And in your view, what is actually the value added for Link in terms of developing a green building or green asset enhancement to your properties, as well as redevelopment of existing buildings to make it greener? So can you share with us?
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our ideas. And sustainability has always been at the heart of our business. And so we look at how to invest in our portfolio in the long term, how to make it lasting for investors, users, etc. So I'll give you a few examples how we deliver on that. On power consumption, we have actually reduced the amount of electricity that we use since 2010 by 40% already. And that's partly because there are increasingly more energy efficient equipment that we can install and provided us brighter lights, but using less energy. So that's an advantage with technology. The second is that we have, out of 127 properties in Hong Kong, 43 of them are air conditioned. The others are actually open air and allow energy airflow to save energy in how we then create, I guess, canopies and tree covers and all that to make sure that the air in the shopping centers are actually cool enough for people to walk past. But for obviously those 54 properties that are air conditioned, we then look at how to make sure that they are efficient. We make sure that they have green certification. Thirdly, we have started installing solar PV on our rooftops. We have the scheme obviously in Hong Kong of selling back the electricity that we have generated back to the two electricity company. So we've done 3 properties so far, 570 panels. We're planning to have 28 of our properties to have EV PV panels on our rooftops. And then surplus food. I mean, in terms of operation, our fresh market has a lot of surplus food. So we have NGOs to help us to deliver surplus food to the needies, but also any food waste we send to the government OPAC facility to generate methane gas and organic fertilizer. So that also reduces our need to put them into landfill, which create obviously methane gas that perhaps will affect the environment. Lastly, I would say, we just talk about BEAM and the certification. 50 of our properties in Hong Kong have received BEAM plus EB certifications. And we're looking at doing more of those. And these certification not only provide us sort of a standard to make sure that these are targets that we want to achieve, but also allow us to compare behaviors and performance between one property and another to encourage our staff to do better. And in China, we get leads, EB. In Australia, we get neighbors. So across each of these assets, each of the assets in different part of the world that we invest in, we try to get these certificate as soon as possible. For example, in Shanghai, we bought a property which didn't have a certification. We need to upgrade it with certain improvements that, and then we got the LEED EB certification. So setting standards, challenging ourselves to reach them, using them to compare, using the standards as a way to do due diligence when we invest, and as we operate, make sure that our colleagues understand the need of doing this and make sure that the operation actually fulfill the need of saving energy and sustainability.
Thank you, George. Just now we talked about the opportunities in developing, investing in green buildings. Now I want to dig deeper into the certification of green buildings and the benefits that they bring. Now, let me direct the first question to Prashant. IFC has created EDGE, which is a green building certification system with a universal standard and software application. So what is the importance of certification system, and in your view, how does it benefit different stakeholders, including developers, homeowners, and financial institutions? Prashant?
At the core of the concept of certification is that, the clients, the home buyers, property buyers, don't trust developers, in the sense that, if developer claims I'm green, how do they know it's real, right? So the basic essence of certification is some sort of validation, a third-party check for the other person that the product is good, right? And I think that, if you can come up with the right kind of metrics-driven, scalable approach to voluntary certification, we can really bring together the market players and prove the business case of going green. And we can then reward the good performance, the developers that are doing green work versus that are not doing green work, right? We can separate the good performance from the bad performance. That's important. Now, from an EDGE perspective, we created EDGE to reduce our risk, right? So if you think about, if you know that these projects are going to save energy, they're going to save water, it ultimately has a long-term impact of risk reduction, right? Cost reduction, risk reduction. And by coming up with a simple validation system, it reduces our transaction cost, frankly, right? Rather than our people going and checking every project to make sure that it's green or not, we can actually just have a third party do that. It's a much more efficient way to get that validation, right? And also what we have in EDGE is a free investment planning tool. So we also know that developers are able to make the right choices to find the lowest cost aspects to get the highest impact. So that's a big impact of using EDGE in the certification platform. Now, as an investor, IFC and the World Bank Group has been investing in developers, in banks to provide credit lines, and we ourselves have been able to offer about $6.5 billion of investments through EDGE certification. So you can see that others could also do the same by coming up with the right products. They can, the banking sector can really tap into this using certification systems like EDGE.
Okay, thank you, Prashant. Now let me turn to Hau-wai. You are an expert in this area. So Hong Kong's Green Building Certification Scheme has actually been launched for more than 20 years. So the BEAM Plus now offers a comprehensive set of performance criteria for a wide range of sustainability issues. So how has this scheme worked so far, and what do you think will be the future focus of the scheme going forward?
Yes, thank you again for the question. Since the introduction of green finance in the finance world in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Green Building Council has been exploring the use of BEAM Plus as a tool for green assessment in buildings for green finance. So far, we have already obtained the Hong Kong QAA's agreement to adopt BEAM Plus for its green finance certification scheme. We are also attempting to integrate global real estate sustainability benchmark for using BEAM Plus. Many of our certifications is now linked to ESG disclosures of corporations. These corporations now include the New World, China, Swire Properties, and some of Hong Kong Land's portfolio. We are continuing our exploration of BEAM Plus, the scope of BEAM Plus, in order to suit the interests of development investors as well as financial investors' interests. We will soon be launching BEAM Plus Data Center coming up in September this year, whereby there will be a dedicated tool for assessing energy performance of data center, which hopefully will be linked to data center REITs. We are developing an assessment tool for existing schools. We have a huge stock of existing schools. We have many NGO buildings like hospitals and other public facilities. I think we have considerable scope in commercial building REITs, whereby investors in commercial buildings would be able to use BEAM Plus to establish ESG ratings in their investment. For existing buildings, we are now exploring the possibility of deep retrofit of huge stocks of existing buildings, whereby if we are able to integrate with regeneration and reuse of existing buildings with energy refit throughout its whole life cycle, then we could certainly increase the savings in energy and reduction in carbon emission from existing buildings. We have already introduced for existing building volume certification of BEAM Plus, whereby existing buildings under the same management would be able to better get their buildings under their management for green certification. We are hoping to establish, if possible, for existing buildings, what we call a retrofit and recommissioning industry, whereby there will be established enterprises, people who would be providing the retrofit services for our existing buildings. We are also looking beyond our buildings to look at the whole built environment. I think we would appreciate that in the whole built environment, apart from buildings, we have infrastructures, we have roads, we have railway, we have other water waste filtration plants, whereby if we were able to assess its energy performance, we may be able to attract financial interests in investing in infrastructures. We are also exploring the possibility of improving the performance of the whole built environment. We'll be introducing a guidebook on energy performance of the whole built environment, and hopefully later on, a rating system for the whole built environment. If we're able to achieve that, we be able to provide assessment certification for maybe a district scale development or redevelopment, whereby attracting financial interests in such development projects.
Thank you, Hau-wai. So my next question is for George. So Lens is an early adopter of green financial products. So what do you see as the benefits? And then in this process, to what extent the certification system or the scheme actually help with the adoption of green financing?
In 2016, we adopted a green finance framework. And recently, we have updated it into a sustainable finance framework, which outlines the environmental, social, and governance KPIs. This has helped us to ensure that we manage our organization that it is resilient by reducing negative environmental impact, maintaining our social license to operate, and also strengthen our organization to make sure that it is governed in a transparent and robust manner. So all this obviously is driven also by investor demand. They want to make sure that they understand how we are performing. To date, having launched originally green finance, now doing more sustainable financing, what we have done now is that over 30% of our existing debt is now tied to an ongoing sustainability for performance. And with the improved performance, we might get a lower loan margin, for example. And so these are ways that the investor are now looking at how to allocate the capital to issuers that are more sustainable than others. And so we have certainly seen as a trend, lower cost of financing if we have certification to prove that we are indeed, shall I say, dark green rather than light green. And so these certification is not just, is only part of our sustainable finance strategy. Apart from that, we also look at the social component, the governance component. We're also moving towards TCFD compliance reporting so that the transparency of how we perform is very clear to our investors, whether they are bond investors, our lenders, or our equity investors. And lastly, recently, we also have announced our 2035 net zero strategy. So we're targeting ourselves to achieve net zero ahead of the Hong Kong target. The challenge is that anyone can be net zero today by buying credit offset. And that's a big cost. We are looking at how to make sure that it is not a OPEX by buying those credits in the future, but spending some CapEx to improve our assets so that we can reduce energy use, reduce our carbon emission, and reduce the need for carbon offset. Because as more and more people taking the easy route, the cost of carbon credit will actually go up. And there's not enough negative carbon project to actually have that many carbon credit issues. So I think that competition will be quite intense. So we want to come up with this 2035 zero carbon strategy early and trying to push our team to be creative and see whether we can achieve that by 2035. Lastly, I would say that we put together a committee to internally to work on how to do this. And this committee are made up of our younger colleagues, because what we want them to understand is firstly, what is net zero carbon, but more importantly is they are the beneficiary, it's the next generation. So in this committee, we are tapping the creativity and ingenuity of our younger colleagues to say, okay, if you can deliver on it, you will see the result in 2035. And so I certainly encourage people to use this opportunity to embrace our younger colleagues into action as well.
Thank you, George. What Link has been doing, I think it's truly impressive. I particularly very impressed by the point about offsetting and how to actually get your team, the younger members of the team, to work together to deliver that mission. Now, I think that wraps up our second round of discussion. Let's move on to the Q&As. I got quite a number of questions from our participants. And it seems that quite a number of them are about the challenges and opportunities in retrofit and retro commissioning. So if I may, I guess we'll focus the discussion on this part, and then I will direct question to our three panelists on the same subject. For George, now from the perspective of an asset manager, what are the obstacles in implementing green asset enhancement to properties and redevelopment of existing properties into green buildings, and how has Link overcome these challenges?
It is a difficult topic, and we own existing building, we bought existing building, we've only developed one. So this has become something that we focus on most of the time. And when we talk about carbon emission by the built environment, obviously most of it comes from existing building. The challenge is that for a lot of the properties that we own, we are part of a mixed-use development. For example, in the housing estate, we own the shopping center portion, but the apartments, the living areas, the common areas might be owned by other landlords, the apartment owners or the government. So how we can actually communicate with each other, have a sense of community and trying to come up with solutions together. Or otherwise, we have to talk to Green Building Council and say, give us a certificate for only our portion and not the other portion. They have to deal with that other portion. And so it is a challenge when it comes to mixed use and we don't own the entire building. The second is building, the old building when they were designed, they are obviously structural constrained because they weren't designed to comply with some of the green building requirement these days. Some can be rectified through some CapEx, some may not. And so those are the, we just spent a lot of time thinking about how to do that. We've upgraded some of the buildings, as I mentioned earlier, one in Shanghai, in order to actually get a LEED EB OM Platinum certification. So there are things you can do to upgrade them. I'll leave with a challenge, and this part is difficult, is that we would like to actually, as a landlord, have green leases with our tenants. What is difficult right now is that in Hong Kong, the market structure is that each of the tenants pay their own electricity. So we actually don't know the carbon footprint of our entire building if you include our tenants. We can only save electricity in the common area and which we recharge to them, obviously. And so how to get the data, how to then work with our tenants, encourage them to also save electricity. That is something that I think is worth a discussion with our electricity company, with Green Building Council, etc., and also perhaps the Retail Management Association, and to try and come up with solutions because the market structure currently is slightly different from some other country where the landlord actually pay the electricity bill for the entire building and then send a charge back to the tenant. So I think this is something that the Hong Kong market structure itself make it a little bit more difficult.
Okay, thank you, George. On the same subject, the next question is actually directed at Prashant. Now the question is, from the industry perspective, what are the obstacles of promoting retrofit and how can different sectors work together to solve this issue? Prashant?
Retrofits is the challenge. And the main challenge or couple of big challenges for retrofits as opposed to new construction, in new construction, you have a developer who builds many houses, you can work through them. They are motivated to sell green products, so they would include it. You can get governments can push policies and make sure good building codes are implemented. Financing is easy because you can give, multi-million dollars to developers and they can build the houses, right? When it comes to the retrofit side, it tends to be homeowners, right? Much smaller size tickets. And even within that, retrofits is a much smaller element of cost compared to the whole building itself. So changing a chiller, changing glazing, changing heating system or adding solar panels is a much smaller cost than the cost of the house itself. So there are two big aspects here. One is the ticket size is small for financial intermediary. And the second is the transaction cost is high compared to the ticket size, right? So you have to go and check all these projects, make sure auditing is done to make sure, you understand what is the right thing, whether the owner is choosing the right instruments and is it really going to save money, all of that aspect. So the last issue beyond these two technical issues is the client motivation, right? So, when you have, let's say, an office building that has many tenants, the big issue is motivation in terms of the client wanting to do these things. When it's a cash cow, it gives them good rent and reward. So how do you get him motivated or to kind of, make all this disruption in their building when actually, it's the savings goes to the tenants, right? So that's kind of a big issue from a motivation side. Now, opportunity-wise, it's a huge opportunity, no doubt, right? Because, if you can have, if you take Hong Kong, most of the buildings that are going to be here in the next 10 years are already built. So, you have to do something about this. And ultimately, for even a financial intermediary, if you're able to show value to the end customer, the owner, the building owner, that they're able to reduce their operating costs, you're reducing risk and reducing costs for them, right? Operating costs. So that's really good. Now, how can we tackle this? I think there are a few ways that I think we can try to do this. One is using labeling systems like energy labeling programs, like energy performance certificates that you have in Europe that have, a label that says, you're a G-rated building, you're an A-rated building, a B-rated building, whatever that is. So once all the stock has a label, then, it's easier, right? So then you can get the homeowner to say, hey, I'm a G, I would like to be an A. Who doesn't want to be an A, right? So they can actually then see, okay, what would it take me to get to an A? They can go to the bank and say, look, I want to borrow some money, maybe $10,000, maybe $20,000 to add solar panels to change my glazing. And the bank then can look at the label and say, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, this is good. I have a threshold. I can come up with a product that says, I will only, I would focus on A and B rated projects to fund it, right? So there's a lot that can be done through labeling systems and creating transparency. And products like Edge can be adjusted to this, not just the labeling. It can even tell you, what are the ways that you can get from G to A and how much will it cost to do that? That could be used to kind of help in that space. The other ways to tackle the ticket size issue is to work with aggregators, right? People that are known as ESCOs, energy service companies that can provide third-party financing to home buyers or maybe even commercial buildings mostly, right? So if you have a chiller that has to be replaced, maybe they replace the chiller, they show the savings and they get the return from the savings that is generated of the replacement, right? That could be a great way to do that. And the main thing is to find credit-worthy ESCOs, and maybe some financial intermediaries are even creating their own ESCOs to go out there and take some risk and start to kind of retrofit these projects. That's kind of some of the ways that can be done from the private sector perspective. Now, I think for retrofits particularly, working with the government is important, particularly municipal government or city governments, because they are the most motivated to make change happen, right? Because they are under pressure from Paris Agreement. They have committed to NDCs to reduce carbon emissions. And, buildings are huge carbon emitters in a city. About 50% of most cities' emissions come from buildings, and most of that comes from existing buildings. So if you can get governments to do two things. One is to come up with the right push to make it really tricky, to really push the market to adopt green building standards on retrofit side, then the financial intermediaries can offer financing for it. But the second one is and it's a little bit more innovative one, if they can help the financial intermediary with the transaction cost, that would be terrific. In the sense that we have seen innovation in places like US, where the investment is made by the bank to the home buyer, but the money is returned through the property tax. That basically makes it easier for for the bank to be able to lend, because they know that they will recover the money through the government platforms, whether utility bills or property tax. So instruments like that would really be a way that banks can partner with municipalities and really start to kind of change the city and be an active member in that market transformation through retrofits.
Thank you, Prashant. So on the same subject, my question for Hau-wai is, to what extent the Green Building Council can help the industry to overcome the challenges in retrofitting?
Yeah. The retrofitting and recommissioning in existing building is really a challenge. What we think we should do is to introduce mindset change to occupants, users, as well as owners of buildings and businesses. We have been launching 2 campaigns. One is called Egg Shop. The other is Green Shop Alliance. The Egg Shop is targeted for investors and building owners, whereby we introduce the technologies involved in retrofitting, and as well as the business case which is available in retrofitting, so that we can get a return for our investments in retrofitting. As regards Green Shop Alliance, it is targeted for operators and owners of shops in shopping malls, whereby tenants are involved in improving energy performance of existing buildings, starting with malls, shopping malls, hotels, these kind of commercial buildings. On the general public, we start off with students. We organize design competitions for primary school students. We're now proceeding on to secondary school students, and later on to university students, whereby we hope to be able to introduce the idea of existing building retrofit not only to the students, but through them to their teachers, as well to their parents. So the message, we hope, should be filtered up and filtered down. On the constraints in retrofitting existing buildings, as mentioned by George, we bring up the idea of better than before. If we are able, and landowners are able, to do at least something to start off, something better than before in their existing portfolio, that is already a great help and a great step forward in retrofitting. The other step we are taking on retrofitting is the need for technical training. We have been providing courses for operators of buildings, managers and operators of E&M equipments, building services in buildings, as to how they should be able to retrofit and recommission. So far, we have trained close to 1,000 people, operators in retrofitting and recommissioning. And we should be able to at least launch and kickstart the process. And I'm hopeful that with the kickstarting, we should be able to, as time goes by, to go a long way towards serving our existing buildings.
Thank you, Hau-wai. Mindful of time, maybe I'll just take one last question from the floor. Now, this is for Prashant from IFC. What is the progress of the green building development in emerging economies in Asia? And how can financial institutions develop strategies and financial instruments that can adapt to these markets? Prashant?
Yeah, in emerging markets, when it comes to the high-end commercial buildings that are letted out to international tenants, they tend to be quite well covered. Like anywhere else in the world, they have a LEED certification, an EDGE certification, and Class A buildings are fine. I think the big challenge is to get the domestic commercial buildings and the residential buildings is a big untapped segment, essentially. And that's where IFC has been focused, really, trying to get emerging markets to push over the last decade. And maybe rather than give you sort of generic kind of answer to that question, maybe I'll use 3 or 4 locations to give you how how emerging markets are picking up. And I would say they're even leapfrogging some of the developed countries in this space. Take South Africa, where we made an investment in a fund that worked with multiple developers to do green housing, about 5,000 units, right? So the developers they were working with had their own projects plus the work that they were doing with the funds. And what they realized after they built these homes, that the homes that were green were selling faster, that were saving money to the end customer. Some of them were rented out. So they can see a 50% difference in energy savings. And so they were like, wow, this is good. I mean, yes, there's an extra cost, but I'm selling the houses faster and my tenants are happier, right? Where they're renting it out. So they queued up and they started to have all their whole stock of existing affordable housing, new construction come forward and go green. So we're seeing a huge change in the pipeline and the stock of construction just through voluntary action in South Africa. And because of that, banks in that country like ABSA and Old Mutual are offering financing to make that, to tap into this opportunity. That's really what you have to watch out for as a financial intermediary to make that work. Let me give you another example in Colombia, where we work directly with the bank through a green bond issue, about $100 million. And the bank used that fund to offer green mortgages in the market along with developer finance. And that really, initially we had to do some hand-holding. We went out and did some workshops with many developers, 300 developers in 15 cities. But market just took off so quickly that today we have about 8% of all of Colombia going green, right? The new construction in residential market. So these things were considered a very difficult area to crack, the residential market. But you can see that with the right kind of instruments, financing, that can make a big difference. Now, let me give you another example of Peru, where finance had nothing to do with it. It was just purely government action. Lima, city of Lima, started to offer 1 extra floor for any project, an apartment that was going to go EDGE certified, right? So developers love that idea of having an extra floor because they make so much more money, right, through the sale of that extra floor. That now a huge percentage of Lima's new construction is using EDGE. So once you make it such a way that actually you're making an intentional decision not to do green, that's really what you have to try to do in emerging markets. And our lesson learned there is 2 things. One is, partner with as many players as you can, governments, municipalities, and not just kind of pushing a voluntary system forward. You have to find other partnerships. And the second is, it's not about saving the planet alone that matters in emerging markets, right? Because for them, cost is a huge impact. In emerging markets, home buyers and homeowners could be spending 20% of their expendable income in utility bills. It's not like the rich countries, right? So if you can make a case that you're going to save them money, most people appreciate that, right? And there is a huge demand, therefore, to adopt green building standards.
Well, thank you. That wraps up our panel discussion very nicely. Well, thank you to our panelists, George, Hau-wai, and Prashant. I think we got a lot of takeaways from the discussion today. One is that green building is really the future. Second is it really creates value for developers, for investors, for owners, for inhabitants. And then the certification scheme does play a great role in ensuring a green, sustainable building program. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to meeting you at the next event. Thank you.
Thank you, Darryl. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Practitioner Talk, Building a Green Future today. We hope you all find today's roundtable insightful. There will be an email sent to each of you with a feedback form. Your suggestion will be carefully considered and highly valuable for us to plan the future events of the Alliance. This concludes the roundtable today, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next event. Thank you and have a good day.